99X. It's the Morning X, Barnes and Leslie. Fram, time to roll into the Morning X True Crime Department. One of my favorites.
We do have a true crime department. People don't know. We do.
No one works in it, but we do have that department. It's for crazy-ass stories like this. So I'm going to play you a trailer of a podcast. What's behind that podcast is true crime and true life, as in someone who is very close to it. But first, take a listen to this 40 seconds. It's called My Fugitive Dad.
But Ashley's dad had a massive secret.
And he said, if I tell you, you have to promise you will not look into it. I don't want you telling anybody.
A secret he kept for more than half a century, not just from his family.
And she looked at me like I'd hit her in the face with a brick.
But from the world.
Ted Conrad walked out of the bank he worked at.
He disappeared with a paper bag containing $215,000.
He'd evaded authorities for 52 years.
So, where is Teddy Conrad today? Who knows?
All right, please welcome Ashley Randele. Hey, Ashley.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So much to unpack here. Congratulations on your podcast, first of all.
Thank you.
It's kind of weird to start way back because I know all of this happened before you were born.
Long before me.
So if we go back to when your dad did the crime, and the crime being he walked out of a bank with $215,000, which today would be what, a couple million?
Yeah, it's like $1.7 or $1.8 million.
That's what I thought. Take me through what you know about that day.
So really, from that day, it was like any other. It was a Friday. It was his birthday weekend. He turned 20 the day before.
20?
Only 20 years old.
Yeah, he'd been 20 for all of 24 hours. And he went to work. He met a friend for lunch. And then when he left work that day, like any other day, he walked out. He, talked to people on the way out. They said, have a great birthday weekend. And they knew he was carrying a paper bag, but it had cigarettes and I think alcohol in it. And he was like, gonna have a great weekend. See y'all later.
And he was a teller at this bank.
Yeah, he was the vault teller. So he was actually the one in charge of the vault.
Which I don't even think that even exists anymore today.
I don't know. I know.
I don't know that I even knew that was a job.
Right.
Honestly. Yeah, and he walked out of that bank on that Friday and was never seen again.
So what year was this?
This was 1969, July 11th, 1969.
Okay, so Dad takes this money. You're not even born yet, which you were born in what year?
I was born in 1985.
Okay, 85. So he walks out the $215,000. Do you know where did he go?
So he went to Washington, D.C. I think he may have gone to L.A., to California, maybe. And then he landed in Boston.
And had all the money still?
Still had the money when he got to Boston, yes.
So living large? Does he buy a big place? What does he do?
Yeah, he lived in a really nice apartment on Beacon Street. And if you're from the Boston area, you're like,
oh, that's nice.
Beacon Street.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of his friends actually said, I'm not a guy who was ever jealous of people or things, but God, your dad's apartment, I was jealous of that. It was a penthouse overlooking the river.
The obvious question would be, how did the bank not know that their employee left with $215,000? I know it was 1969, but still, you would know the money's gone, and you would realize, hey, Mr. Randele's gone.
What? Right? Like, was he ever on America's Most Wanted?
Or real name is what? Conrad?
Yeah, so his birth name was Ted Conrad.
Ted Conrad.
Yeah, Ted Conrad.
I knew him as Tom Randele. So
right.
I'm Ashley Randele.
Oh, Randall, not Randele. Sorry, Randall.
No, nobody says it the Randall.
Because the way it's spelled, E-L-E, I would have thought, Randele, but Randall, okay.
So he left that Friday, and I believe the bank was closed for the weekend. And so on Monday, everyone else got to work, and they went and checked the vault, and there was a discrepancy, and also Ted was not at work. So they knew it was him. And to answer your question, yes, he was on America's Most Wanted. There was also, I think, an unsolved mystery.
Ah, so they were looking for him.
Did he change his appearance? Did he?
He always, for as long as I knew him and seeing photos of him from the 70s and 80s, he always had a beard.
Oh, but not back in the day when he stole the money.
I don't think so, no. I think he grew that afterwards.
And you're 20 years old and you got 250 grand or 15 grand. You're living large.
It really is.
In 1969.
Yes.
It's like, what?
I mean, by all accounts, he lived in a really nice apartment and he didn't have a full-time job. So he didn't buy like a boat or fancy cars. He just lived a really nice life for a few years, but essentially burned through it. By the time he met my mom, the money was gone.
We're right in the middle of a story. We're talking to Ashley Randele, who her dad, Ted Conrad, before she knew him, but then Ted Randele, he is the subject of My Fugitive Dad, which is her podcast, investigative series, and it explores this story in way greater detail. But basically, he was an infamous bank robber. He disappeared with $215,000 on a Friday, just disappeared without a trace. Ashley didn't exist yet. Her mom was not married to him yet and all that. So that's where we are in the story. So he left. He's living large in Boston. When does he meet your mom?
He actually met her and essentially her group of friends right when he landed in Boston in the summer of 1970. But they didn't really know each other. It was like he was a friend of their friends. They got together in the late 70s.
Oh, the late 70s. So when did they get married?
82.
Ooh.
Yes.
Did he lie to her about, because he didn't have a job, he was living in a fancy apartment in Boston?
Yeah, so when he first landed in Boston, the story he told to the friends he'd made was that he was an only child and his parents had died in a car crash when he was 18. And it was too sad to still be living, you know, where he had lived his whole life. So he just packed a suitcase, left everything behind, didn't have any extended family, no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents.
Wow.
And just moved to Boston. And who questions that? Like, if somebody told me that, I wouldn't be like, well, may I have details about the death of your parents? Like, absolutely not.
So when he blew through the money and everything, so when your mom met him and they got together in the late 70s, what sort of job did he have?
At that point, I believe he was working, he was an excellent golfer, and he worked as a golf pro at a couple country clubs, and he worked up in Massachusetts. And then when it was winter here, he would go down to Florida and work at country clubs as a golf pro down there.
This is very Catch Me If You Can-ish. So much reminds me of Frank Abagnale in the way, I mean, just in hearing you talk about how, oh, he's a golf pro. Of course he's a golf pro.
It reminds me of this movie I just saw on Apple TV, Ashley, called The Family Plan with Mark Wahlberg, where he's like this suburban dad, right?
I just saw a preview for that. It looks great.
Yeah. You need to watch it because then they find out he was an assassin.
God.
And the family knew nothing.
That's slightly cooler.
How? So your mother, when she meets him, he never tells her at all?
Nope.
So what was the moment when you and your mom both found out about his past?
So it was the spring of 2021, and my dad had been diagnosed with a really aggressive form of lung cancer, and he was dying. He was home with hospice.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And I think he realized that it was getting close to the end, and he was really worried that this would somehow come out and that Mom and I would be completely blindsided by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he ended up telling us really just like a month, maybe a month and a half before he died.
How?
Just to make sure that we were okay. It was very nonchalant. It was very my dad. We were sitting in the living room watching, I think, NCIS. And he just looked at us and said, ladies, just in case something comes up after I die, I just don't want you to be blindsided. I had to change my name when I moved here.
Wow.
The authorities might still be looking for me.
What? And you're sitting there with your jaw dropped open.
Honestly, for a second, I was like, this is a terrible dad joke. Like, weird humor, Dad, but okay. Like, because he was sort of the king of dad jokes, and I thought he was just being funny, and then I realized he wasn't being funny.
Did he wait for a commercial, or did he do it during the show?
It was probably a commercial.
Okay,
or he
good.
Paused it. Yeah.
So, yeah, he looks over it, and I mean, this is so recent, 2021, and he says all this to you, and then then you have a million questions, and I'm sure that, you know, in his health at that time, he probably wasn't peppy about answering all of it, or his memory might be foggy. What happens when he starts outgushing, you know, all this stuff to you guys?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us was to tell him that we love him. One of the reasons he never told my mom, I mean, they were married for almost 40 years, and I was at the time 35. He was really worried that it would change how we felt about him, that maybe we wouldn't love him the same way, or we'd look at him differently. And it was so important for my mom and I at that point to make sure he knew that, like, yes, we need to talk about this. And it isn't great that you lied to us this whole time, but we still love you. And for me, I'm like, you're still my dad, and you're the best dad. And this doesn't change that, but we do need to talk about it because you did steal a lot of money.
Were there any red flags looking back? Because, you know, the movie that I just watched that I mentioned, you know, he never wanted to be on social media, didn't want his picture taken. Like, looking back, were there red flags?
So those kinds of signs, no. I mean, I have Facebook, and my dad was never shy about being in photos or family photos. When he worked at 128 Volvo, they had an ad on television, and at the end it was a picture of the sales guys who worked there. And my dad's on TV. Never shy about that.
I'm sure at times you just forget about it. We're talking to Ashley Randele, who has My Fugitive Dad. It's a podcast that goes into great detail about her dad, who walked out of a bank in 1969, $215,000, doesn't tell anyone, never got caught, and the equivalent of like 1.7, 1.8 million today. So he tells you everything. Do you contact authorities at that point, or do you wait till your father, which I know he passed away shortly after that, do you wait till he's gone?
So we did not contact the authorities, and we actually never did.
Doesn't that make you an accessory to a crime, though?
So, no.
No?
Maybe, no. Because he was dying.
Right.
What awful person in that moment calls the authorities? You know, your dad's dying of hospice.
I know, but just asking, because you know how police can be hardcore. I wonder if they go, well, you knew and you didn't tell us. But guys, the money's gone.
Yeah, there's no money. I think it's public knowledge. My parents filed for bankruptcy in 2014.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
When did, so you knew you had all this information. When did you start investigating all of this?
So it was really after it ended up coming out in the fall of 2021. Somebody had found my dad's obituary and sent it to a crime writer in Ohio. And I don't know how they connected the dots, but they figured out that my dad, Tom Randall, was Ted Conrad. And they passed that along to the authorities.
How someone that knew they had privileged information leaked it?
I don't know. My dad kept his birthday. He just changed the year. So his birthday was still July 10th. And he kept his parents' first names. And Ruthabeth is sort of a uncommon name. Essentially, the authorities ended up finding out, you know, without my mom and I never told anyone. Our plan was to wait a year to get through that first year of grief. I mean, I think anyone will tell you when you lose somebody, that first year is awful because it's all the firsts. So we had talked, and Dad knew that after a year, we knew who to call. You read any article about Ted Conrad. John Elliott was the original U.S. Marshal, and his son, Pete Elliott, had sort of taken up the mantle of looking for Ted Conrad. So we knew who we would contact, and we were going to do it the summer of 2022.
How long did he live after giving all the information up to you, after admitting it?
It was just about a month,
wow.
Maybe an extra week. Yeah, I mean, from the date of his diagnosis, he was gone less than 2 months later.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah,
sorry.
It's fast. Thank you.
What a story.
Well, you know, for those that are, this is a fascinating story. You know, they should listen to your podcast, My Fugitive Dad. Have you been contacted by, a Netflix or Lifetime movie or anything? Because this is so fascinating. I see it as like a docu-series.
I mean, would that not be the coolest thing ever?
How can it not be? This is like made for that.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason that I started this podcast really was because I wanted to find out who my dad was before he had me. But also, a big piece for me was that, I didn't want my dad to be erased. Right now, if you Google Tom Randele, the page that comes up corrects his name to Theodore J. Conrad, and the only thing you see is that he's a fugitive bank teller.
That's tough, yeah.
It was really hard for me because my dad was just the most exceptional father ever. And if you listen to the podcast, I've spoken to some of my friends who've listened to it, and they say it just like they were happy crying listening because they were remembering my dad and how incredible he was. So I'm just thrilled to be able to share that part of my dad with everyone because it is
good for you.
Super fascinating.
Wow, I can't wait to listen to the whole thing.
On the run for 50 years.
Yes. All right, Ashley Randele.
Thank you so much.
My Fugitive Dad is the podcast. We really appreciate you telling your story. I can't wait to hear the whole thing on the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Morning X with Barnes and Leslie. 99X.